hello and welcome to everybody. My name is Jason Buck. I'm a business development director here at Lean Techniques. If you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to welcome you. We're definitely glad you're here. Lean Bites are a short 60-minute talk where our experts will provide you with simple practical tips and techniques that you can start applying within your organization today. So before we get started, number one, if you have any questions throughout today's talk, drop them in the chat. And we can either address them at the end if time allows, or we can follow up with more insight and an email follow-up for you all. And please do us a huge favor. Number two, at the end of the presentation today, a survey will pop up automatically at the end. Your feedback is super important to us for how things went today, what you learned, and what you might want to see in the future from some of these Lean Bites. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my fellow LTers and friends. You remember them from last week. Alex McClure and Jacob Reed. They've been vital in aiding our partners in their migration projects, especially within ADO and GitHub. And they're going to be presenting part two of their two-part Lean Bites on Azure DevOps and GitHub and making the right call for your organization. So Alex and Jacob, take it away. Thanks.
All right, cool. Thanks, Buck. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is what are Azure DevOps and GitHub. What sets GitHub apart? What sets Azure DevOps apart? What are their strengths? What are their differences? In that GitHub is very repo-centric, Azure DevOps very task-centric, and also the AI integration, the big ticket item that we have for a lot of this with GitHub. And then things also to consider before moving, or is it right for your organization? So going through a little bit of history, Azure DevOps has always been a Microsoft product that evolved from two separate products, Team Foundation Server, TFS, and Visual Studio Team Services, which was more of their DevOps pipeline part of that, and then became Azure DevOps to unify the repo, CI/CD, and project tracking. GitHub was a separate GitHub or Git repository hosting service, started back in 2008. It became widely used for a bunch of open source repositories, very, very heavily used across the entire industry, the most common source control management that we have right now, and then was acquired by Microsoft in 2018, but both products still live on. So both Microsoft products, just very different histories and strengths to them. So a little bit about the whole task-centric versus repo-centric. A lot of this comes down to the development and the user experience when you are in these different platforms. Azure DevOps has a breakdown of projects. So you might have one department on a project, another department on another project, or individual teams on different projects, depends how your organization sets it up. But then within that, you're going to have three different views, which are the pipelines, the boards, the repositories, plus a bunch of others. But for the purposes of comparison, you really have kind of three separate task-oriented areas where you can then go and see the different boards, different pipelines, different repositories within each of those. Versus in GitHub, you have an organization and everything is centered around the repository. So when you are in a repository for GitHub, you're going to have all of your associated pipelines, all of your associated issues / project management type things together, individual repository settings, whereas in Azure DevOps, that all tends to be much more segregated by your task rather than by your repository. So GitHub, it's a lot more revolves around the code, whereas Azure DevOps, it revolves more around individual different tasks that different roles might play within that. So looking at platform strengths, Azure DevOps is really good at full-blown project management as compared to GitHub. GitHub has a very lightweight interface for project management, which tends to leave some things to be desired, especially if you're running in Scrum, Safe. GitHub tends to work really well for Kanban flows, but doesn't really offer a lot of iteration type things. For Azure DevOps, if you have heavy manual test reporting and test auditing automation, there's a lot more to that. There's a lot more depth in that, whereas GitHub tends to be much more around the automated CI/CD parts of that. Azure DevOps, you have a lot more options for gated kind of enterprisey CI/CD workflows. If you have a lot of needs for different users being able to approve different parts of workflows, that's a lot easier to do in Azure DevOps than it is in GitHub. And then complex deployment patterns along with that. We need to deploy to multiple different ends with different gates, being able to merge branches and manage different deployments on multi-branch strategy. You're going to find a lot more support for that in Azure DevOps than you are in GitHub. In GitHub, you are going to have a lot more lightweight project management, which tends to be really nice if you have devs working on things specifically. Not as much project management overhead. Also very good for when you have kind of distributed teams or multiple teams can work on different repos together. So more of that, dev enablement of, hey, I can go make the changes in someone else's repo that I need to. It's a lot easier for devs to be able to do that. Discoverability, being able to know what pipelines you have associated with a repository or what issues you have associated with a repository. That repo centric really makes that a lot easier for developers to be able to see, oh, hey, here's all the things that I need in order to make this project actually work. Reusability, the marketplace for shared actions and shared workflows in GitHub is very expansive. That comes a lot with the heavy community support that is there. Um, you're going to be able to get a lot more just out of the box support from different actions, different shared workflows for your organization. It's a lot easier to just keep things repeatable without duplicating a lot of code within GitHub. And then the CI/CD flexibility is great in GitHub. You have matrix builds. It allows you to run on different operating systems, run on different targets, being able to run full suites of tests really quickly as opposed to having to run them all, together. Being able to see those report outs really easily is very nice. And then we're going to throw it over to Mr. Jacob here on AI integration.
Thanks, Alex. One of the big differentiators for GitHub is the AI integration that it has. So GitHub is continually improving the features and technology behind this, but kind of where this all started was the chat interface within VS Code. So you could chat with the agent, ask it questions, basically replace Stack Overflow. If you ever looked at the number of views that Stack Overflow gets, it's down quite a bit now, and that's all attributed to GitHub Copilot Chat. And they've slowly improved upon this over the last couple of years. They had a chat completion. So as a developer is coding within one of their IDEs, um, the AI will look at what you've typed, what it thinks you will be typing, and give you better code completion. It's essentially IntelliSense on steroids. And then more recently, we've jumped into kind of like the agentic era of AI. So inside of that chat interface now, you can ask it, create me tests for this bit of code that I just wrote, and it will go out to your IDE and write all of that code for you. And then it can also do that within PR reviews. So you open a PR within github.com. The Copilot reads your changes. It keeps track of your repo setup and provides you suggestions on how to improve your code, either performance wise, any security issues, and all of that fun stuff. And then also there is the Copilot CLI, which a developer can run within their terminal to kind of it's very similar to the chat and agent interface, but it's more friendly to the developers if they're more used to using CLI based tools. So this is really the big differentiator for GitHub right now is GitHub Copilot. You might be able to integrate some of these things into Azure DevOps, but this is all built in under a simple plan within GitHub. We can go to the next slide. So let's say you are considering moving from ADO to GitHub. There's a couple things you do need to consider before making that migration. And one of the first things to do is to basically get your house in order within ADO. Look at your repositories that maybe aren't being used. They haven't been committed to in a year. Do you still need them? It's important, to clean up what you have today before you migrate that to GitHub, because you might be just taking one mess from one place to another. So you want to get everything cleaned up, maybe collapse repos where it makes sense. Maybe you've just got like a ton of repos out there that are just very small and aren't individually deployable. So bringing those, collapsing them into one single repository might make sense. GitHub and Microsoft do have a few tools available to us. There's this GitHub Enterprise Importer, also called ADO to GitHub. It's a CLI tool that will look at your ADO environment. It'll take into account all your repos, all your pipelines. It can tell you if your pipeline can be automatically converted into a GitHub action. It can tell you if your repo hasn't been committed to in a year. It's just a good place to get an inventory of where your environment sits today. And then the next thing is to determine how your teams should migrate to GitHub. You can use that GitHub Enterprise Importer to automatically import. I'll say from experience that isn't always going to work. There's a lot of customizations within ADO. And sometimes things just won't magically import as you might hope. So there might be some manual processes behind the scenes you need to do in order to migrate your environment to GitHub. And then the other thing to consider along with that is if you want to do a repo migration or a pipeline migration or both, you can just migrate the repo separately and still have your pipelines run in ADO. Migrating your repos first is a lot simpler than migrating both. That's just moving one Git repository to another Git repository, and it's a pretty well figured out process these days. The pipeline to GitHub Action is where you're going to run into more issues. It's just more difficult to completely migrate an ADO pipeline to GitHub Actions. They have different syntax, different types of tasks that can be run within each environment, and that could be more of a manual effort to complete. And finally, just as you begin your migration, monitor and have people available to help your teams. Learning a whole new Git repository system is difficult, and some teams might need more help than others. And just being available to answer questions and be there to help empower your employees to make the change. So with that, anything else you had, Alex?
Yeah, one thing we definitely want to consider on that switch is that GitHub's project management is definitely not as robust. So if you do tend to have a kind of heavier project management suite, PMs, POs, all of that, it's definitely worth considering keeping that on ADO or looking at other solutions for that alongside this GitHub migration. I've seen we've seen clients that are moving to GitHub, but still keep all of their project management in ADO because it is all there. We've seen people look at switching to Jira or even Trello if it's really simple, but at that point, I would look at GitHub's integrated projects. So making sure that you are definitely evaluating the project management part of it just as much as you are the development side of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your week.